We came in 1946 after the war, and my father had been the manager of the F.W. Woolworth store in Marshalltown, Iowa, drafted in the service, went to Europe, and when he came back, the Woolworth company had lost the lease on the store, on the building. They said they'd find him a job, but he decided at that age, if he was going to start over, he was going to do it on his own. And because of his travels in the Army, he had decided that the West was where it was going to be. So he came out, went all up and down the West Coast looking for a store that he could buy, and there weren't any because everybody else had the same idea. He finally landed in a little town called McMinnville, which had about 4,000 people. He bought a little store, and it was in a small building. He took a lease on the building. The whole store was 2,000 square feet, which is small. But it had an upper story where we kept cardboard boxes with merchandise. And that's where we lived, among the boxes. And we worked in the store. And that's when I started working. I was 7 years old in that store. I always used to say when I was young, I didn't have a family, I had a store. I was president of the junior high, and then when I went to high school, the freshman year, classmates wanted me to be president of the freshman class. I said, no, I've already done that. You should elect somebody else. Well, they didn't like that. So finally they decided, the deal I offered them, I said, look, you elect somebody else for the first part of the year, and then you can revisit this. And so they elected a fellow, a nice guy, and then they elected me, and then I was class president every year after that. Then I went to the University of Oregon, and as a freshman, in the spring of the year, I was elected to the Student Senate, and I did. I was very active in student government. I was also on the Emerald editorial board. I was on the Herb Memorial Union board, and I was president of my fraternity. So I did a lot of things. Well, I suppose because I'd done it all through school, I had a bent toward public service. And I always said that growing up in the stores, I was serving the public. So later, when people say, well, how did you get to do this? I realized it was just the reverse. I'd gone from serving the public to public service. That's all it was. I was doing the same thing. I came to the legislature with specific ideas, one of which was tax credits for home weatherization. Nobody had ever heard of such an idea. And so I sponsored House Bill 2701, which ended up being the tax credits for home weatherization. If you weatherized your home, you could get some incentives to do that. The utilities fought it like crazy. They just thought, it's the biggest, dumbest idea in the world. I said, well, look, you won't have to build so many nuclear plants. You won't have to build so many dams. If people start saving energy, think of the aspects of that. Well, that's, of course, what turned out to happen, even though it took them years to figure out that that was a good idea. I had other ideas. I had a bill to index income tax rates. It passed, which was very unusual, I thought, because I was a Republican in a Democrat legislature, and how would a freshman Republican get a bill like that passed? Home weatherization I could see, because Democrats could get onto that. Cutting taxes, maybe not so much. Well, I didn't cut them right away. I just indexed them over time to the rate of inflation. It passed. Most amazing. The following year it was repealed because Oregon fell into another huge recession, and they just couldn't afford it anymore. I was in the House Judiciary Committee, and we had a bill in there that was, I can't remember the name they called it, but it was I would call it anti-hate bill, but it was more about ethnic relationship. It was a sensitive issue with Vic, and he wanted that bill passed. And people weren't moving on it, even the Democrats weren't. I was quite surprised, but they somehow, I don't know, they didn't like it. And so I picked up that ball and ran with it, and I think it meant a lot to Vic that I did that, and the bill was passed. It was one of the last bills passed that session, but it got passed. It's an office that's just not understood. The state treasurer is thought to be the guy that writes the checks and pays the bills. That's a very small part of the state, and the state does, by the way, operate a bank. It's not much thought about, but there was a time when there was a teller's cage in the treasurer's office, and you could go down there and cash a check. They didn't take deposits, but they operate a bank of sorts because they accept money that the state Department of Revenue gets, and they issue checks. So but that's like a very small part of the state treasurer's office. And I remember I was out in eastern Oregon at a newspaper, maybe Hermiston. It was a small town, and the editor says, "How does it feel to run for an office that nobody cares about?" And I thought, this is a really good question, because he was absolutely right. Nobody cared about the state treasurer's office. And they had a complete misconception about what the state treasurer did. So I thought, well, here's an opportunity. We're going to educate the people, and we're going to show them what the office could be. And the economy in Oregon was in terrible shape at the time. The unemployment rate, I've told you, was just off the charts. And people were desperate for jobs, employment, and that was the number one issue. So I turned the state treasurer's office into a job creation office. And when I would go out and talk, that's all I talked about was the economy and creating jobs and helping businesses. There was a federal program. If you would put money into rehabilitation of housing for senior citizens and disabled people, the federal government would guarantee the loans, so they were money good, like vesting in treasuries. But they needed money, so we put up the money. And they went around, and every little town, well, it's medium-sized towns too, in Oregon, had a grand hotel in the downtown that was derelict, empty. And it was an eyesore and a blight on the community, and they all felt badly about it. But they didn't have any money, and nobody would fix it up. I'll give you an example is Astoria. Right at the end of the main street, a big, wonderful hotel, it sat empty. The windows were broken. The seagulls were flying through it. And we financed that. There was one in Medford. There was, well, right downtown Eugene. There was, as I recall, one in Bend. There were 6 overall, and we financed those. And even today, those are still operating, and they're operating as senior citizen and disabled housing. One of the other things we did was finance Pioneer Place in downtown Portland. There was a 4-square block area down there that was just a blight on the city of Portland. They couldn't, they were trying hard to make it into something, but they couldn't. The city of Portland did a good job of proposing a shopping center down there, an urban center, if you will, and they had they got the Rouse Company, who had done the Faneuil Market in Boston, and then later others. They designed this whole thing. They got First Chicago, a big bank then, gone now, and so we worked together and we made that happen. And that's why you see the shopping downtown, because I said to my staff, we have to make this happen. This is the diamond in the tiara of Portland. If this doesn't happen, downtown Portland's going in the toilet, because it was a 4-square, empty block, blighted area. That's all it was. So today, it's a vibrant shopping center. I considered it a very important trust. You were given this responsibility and this job, and it was something that you should hold very dear to your heart. And in accomplishing your job. I think that's important, but for young people today, I would say what's important, you have to be involved. You have to participate in government, and because this is the way you keep it good. Democracy is a very fragile thing, and it can be upset, and it can be disturbed. When Benjamin Franklin walked out of the Constitutional Convention, he was asked by a bystander, so what form of government do we have? Because it could have gone to a monarchy. And he said, it's a republic if you can keep it. And Lincoln said once upon a time that a house divided against itself cannot stand. And that's also very poignant and very appropriate for the time, because yes, you can have disagreements, but you have to discuss. You have to have the art of compromise even, which seems to be a lost art nowadays. But if you are divided, you cannot stand. You just won't. So people who are trying to divide you look at that with suspicion. Why is that? It's been done over history, usually with bad results.